Hello and welcome to Talk Julia. My name is David Amos.
And my name is Randy Davila.
This week on Talk Julia, we want to talk about setting up a Julia environment using VS Code. We'll talk a little bit about how to install Julia in case you haven't done that yet, although I think most people listening to this probably already have Julia installed. We'll talk about installing VS Code and using the Julia VS Code extension, as well as some bonus tips and things at the end, like using the JuliaMono font. So to kick it off, let's do a quick overview on installing Julia. Probably the preferred way to download Julia is to go to julialang.org and click on the green download button. And that'll take you to a page where you can see all the different platforms that are supported, and you can download the binary installers for those. You can also download the source and you can compile it from source if need be. But one thing that you might want to take a look at, if you look at the different platforms, so there's like the Windows, the Mac OS x86, like the Intel or Rosetta, or the new Mac OS ARM M series processors, all this little help link next to it. If you click on that, it'll take you to some platform specific instructions that have a lot more detail on the steps to actually install it. So this is really helpful if you're just installing it for the first time, because it kind of gives you a little walkthrough. And there's some important stuff to note here. So things like getting Julia on your path if you're on Windows or Mac OS, and also covering things like uninstallation and things like that.
And it's okay to have several versions of Julia installed on your computer, as we'll see in a bit.
Yeah, exactly. You can download multiple versions and have them all side by side. That's not a problem. But I think this is the preferred way to do it. I always like to get it from straight from the source, right? And not try to I don't know if there's if you can get Julia through Homebrew or something like that. But there's a note in the installation docs about unofficial binaries. It says there are a variety of distribution-specific packages that are community contributed. So maybe this is something you would get through like your package manager if you're using like a Linux install or something like that. They may not use the right versions of Julia dependencies or have important patches. That is something to keep in mind. My recommendation is to always go to the julialang.org website and download the latest version there, because you know it's going to have all the right dependencies. Everything's going to be the way it should, and it's maintained by the Julia Lang maintainers and not by someone that's maintaining that package for a particular distribution. There are also a couple of alternative ways to install it that are interesting. I personally have not used these. So there's a jill.py tool which can automate the installation workflow on all platforms, and that's actually a Python package. So you'll need to have Python installed and pip installed, and you just run pip install Jill, and then you can use Jill install to install the current stable release, and also Jill install latest to get like the nightly builds, which are the like preview versions, not necessarily stable, but if you wanted to preview something, you could do that. There's also this Julia Up on Windows, which is a installer and version manager, and you can use it to install specific Julia versions, and you can update to the latest release. It handles getting everything on path for you, which is really nice. That can be difficult, especially maybe for students. It might be a good option. And it will also alert you when a new version is available. So once you have Julia installed, you'll want to go to code.visualstudio.com, and you can download Visual Studio Code there. It should automatically detect what platform you're on. So for mine, it's automatically detected that I am on a Mac, and you'll just click the button. It'll take you to a page that has some like getting started documentation, but that install should start immediately and download to your computer. If it doesn't detect your platform, or if you want to download it for a different platform, there is an other platforms button right there. And then they also have an Insiders edition if you want to preview the latest features and things like that. But I don't use the Insiders edition. I just use the stable release. And it's simple. You just download it and it installs just like any other application on your computer. You can also install it through like the Microsoft Store, the Mac App Store, and I think even like the Ubuntu App Store will have it in there. So that's another way to do it. But I just use the blue download button here. Once you have VS Code installed, there's a couple of different ways you can open it, actually. You can open it from your applications menu on Mac or on Windows or things like that. There's actually another way that you can open it. You can open code from the terminal itself, and this is a good way if you want to open just a specific file or open it within a specific directory. So for example, I have a projects directory, and I have one for Talk Julia, and then I've set up one for this podcast episode called Julia VS Code. And if I want to open VS Code from that directory, I just cd into that directory and type code and then the period. So once you have VS Code open, then on the left-hand tab, you've got different buttons. There's a File Explorer button, there's a Search tab, there's a Source Control tab, Run and Debug, and an Extensions tab. So if you click on the Extensions tab and search for Julia, then you'll see the Julia extension should be the first one that comes up. And one thing to note is that when you hover over it, you'll see that it says Julia version 1.5.11. That is not the version of Julia. That is the version of the Julia extension. So don't get confused by that.
Right. And isn't this maintained by just one person?
I believe right now, yeah, it is open source. I think there have been some contributors, but yeah, I think it's one person that's doing a lot of the work. And I really, really appreciate all the work that they are putting into it. So when you select that, then I've already got it installed. So I don't see the install button here, but right in this area, right at the top of the screen, there will be an install button. You just click install. It installs the extension for you, and you should be all good to go. And what's nice about the Julia extension is if you have Julia installed and it's just installed like in the default location on your computer, or if you don't have it installed in the default location, but you have it on your path, then the extension will recognize that and it will automatically link everything together. But the extension has some really awesome features that make working with Julia, not just in VS Code better, but also kind of just make working with Julia a little bit better as well. So I think it's a really nice environment and I love the direction they're taking it. But let's just kind of talk through some of the features real quick. You get the syntax highlighting. So it'll recognize .jl files and that those are Julia files, and it'll highlight all the syntax for you. You get some Julia specific commands. And what they mean by that is the commands in the command palette. So if you are on a Mac, it's Command Shift P to open the command palette. I think that's probably Control Shift P on Windows or Linux. And if you type Julia, then you'll see a whole bunch of commands that are available to you. So there's one called Start REPL. There's Julia Weave commands, which integrates with this weave.jl package. There's commands for activating a parent environment or activating this environment, add symbols to compiled modules and functions. There's a whole bunch of different commands here. Some of them already have key bindings associated with them, but because these commands are here, then you can configure ones that do not have key bindings. You could then configure them to have key bindings. So if there are commands you use a lot, you can configure VS Code and assign a key binding to those so that you can have quick access to them without having to search for them in the command palette. But yeah, it comes with a whole bunch of stuff that you can use there. So that's nice. I mentioned that there's this open Julia REPL command. So it has an integrated Julia REPL, which we're going to talk about more in a second. That is one of my favorite features. It also comes with code completion and IntelliSense, hover help, that kind of stuff. You get a linter. So if you're coding in like a .jl file, it'll run static checks against it so that you don't have to run anything, and it may catch syntax errors or things like that, and a bunch of other stuff. So it integrates with the VS Code debugger, works great, setting up tasks for running tests, builds, benchmarks, and building documentation, a plot gallery, a grid viewer for tabular data. Yeah, so today I think we just want to go through some of the cool features and talk about them and show you how they work, because there's a lot of really nice stuff in here that makes developing Julia and VS Code really nice. So now we've got Visual Studio Code installed and we've opened it up to a directory. We have nothing inside of this directory, right? And we want to code some Julia. So in your File Explorer on the left-hand side, there is a little, looks like a sheet of paper with a plus sign to create a new file. And I'm going to click that and just call this myscript.jl. Inside of that, let's just start with something really, really basic. So I'm going to create two variables, x and y. So x equals 1, y equals 2. And then I'm going to do x plus 2. Or actually, let me wrap that in a print line. To run the code, you have a couple of different options. The way that I've used a lot is just Control F5. So type Control F5 and it will run it, and it will open up in your terminal, and you'll see the output there. It's showing 3. Oh, I did x plus 2. Instead of x plus y, whatever. Same thing, because y is equal to 2. You can also click this little play button in the top right-hand corner, and that will do the same thing. It'll open up the terminal, and here I see the output 3.
So the previous time you didn't end up in the REPL. Now I see the REPL.
Yeah, the last time it did it in the output tab. This time it actually shows up with the REPL here. There's another way to run it though, and that is to highlight the code in the file that you want to run and hit Shift Enter. And now I should see, yeah, it printed 3 again in my REPL. So to open up the terminal in VS Code, you can go to terminal, new terminal in the file menu, but the quickest way is to use the control backtick shortcut. So that will toggle open and close the REPL, and that's a really handy shortcut to know. But notice how the code that I highlighted, I get this little check here showing me that it ran without an error, and it also shows me what the output was of all that. Not the output in terms of like printing, because it printed something that's out, but like what was actually returned.
So X and Y are currently in your REPL session. What happens if you highlight only print line X plus Y and run only that line of code?
All right, so I'll highlight that and hit Shift Enter. In this case, it worked because I already had X and Y set.
Right.
So it's all tied into this session. So because I had already run those lines of code, it knows what X and Y are. What about using the REPL? So like, let's say I want to run this file. So if I open my terminal, so now I'm not in the Julia REPL, I'm just in my terminal. I'm in the current working directory, which is this Julia-VS Code directory. So let's do something that needs a package. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove this and I'm going to type using CSV and data frames. I'm going to open a new file over here and I'm going to create a little data.csv file. Yeah, so I've typed first, comma, last, comma, age for the header. And then on the second line, David, comma, Amos, comma, 37. I'm 37 years old. Randy, comma, Davila, comma, you told me earlier you're 34 years old. And I'll save that. So I've got the CSV file here. And in my script, now I'm going to read the CSV file and put it into a data frame. So I'm going to type data equals CSV in all caps dot read, and then open that function in parentheses and type data.csv for the first argument as a string. That's the path to the CSV file that I want to read. And then the second argument, I think they call the parameter sync. That's where you want the data to go. And in this case, we want it to go into a data frame. So I'm going to type data frame there. And then I'm going to print the data. Right now, I don't have CSV or data frames installed. So I'm going to open the Julia REPL by typing Julia in my terminal. And then I'm going to type the right bracket to get into the package manager. And then I'm going to create a new environment in my current directory by typing activate space period. And then I'm going to add the CSV and the data frame packages.
Prior to activate period, it was version 1.7, and then after you typed activate space period and ran that, it became the name of the current working directory that you're in.
Right. So it shows me in the package manager REPL that I'm now in this Julia-VS Code environment. And over in my file explorer, I can see the manifest.toml and project.toml files that were created when I added those packages. Okay, so now what I want to do is run this file. So this is where the power of the Julia VS Code extension really comes in. So if I am in my terminal and I want to run this script from the command line, I would type Julia, and then if I use myscript.jl, it's going to run the script, but it's going to have a problem, right? Because if I try to run it, it's going to say error, load, error, argument, error, package CSV not found in current path. And that's because when I run the Julia command from the command line, it is automatically going to use the base kind of global Julia environment. Now, if I want to use the project environment I just created, I would type julia-project and then myscript.jl. And now it will run using the project that I have in my current directory. And then it'll print out the data frame. There it is. And we can see the header, first, last, age, and then 2 rows with my information and Randy's information. However, this is not the best way to do it inside of VS Code. So I had to type Julia and then -- project, myscript.jl, all that stuff. What we want to do is use the environment that we have. So first of all, there's a couple of things to note. At the very bottom of VS Code in the status bar, there is, on the left-hand side, a Julia env button. And right now it says v1.7. So the current environment I have selected for this is the base kind of global Julia environment. I can click on that and it will show me the different environments that I can select. And I can select Julia-VS Code to make sure that I've got the Julia environment selected. Let me go back to v1.7 and show you a couple of things real quick. If I click the play button, then I get that error again that says that it could not find the CSV CSV package. I would get the same thing if I did the Control F5 to run it. And that's because I have that 1.7 Julia environment selected. So if I go here and select Julia VS Code as the selected environment and then run this again, I'll click the play button in the top right hand corner again.
It's really nice that you can just like click on that little button to navigate between the versions of Julia. Like, for example, my button shows version 1.7 and 1.5 because I have both of those versions. It's just a super convenient way to kind of pick what environment you want to use.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have multiple versions, you can also switch between those as well. So now that I have that Julia VS Code environment selected, now when I hit the play button, it worked and it shows the 2x3 data frame with the information in it. Now, what about opening the REPL? So if I want to open a Julia REPL, let me go back to my base terminal. Normally, if you wanted to open the Julia REPL, I would type Julia, right? And it drops me into a Julia REPL. And then I could do things like I could include myscript.jl, but I'm going to get that error. Even though I have the right environment selected for VS Code, inside of the terminal, it's not aware of that environment. So I tried to include myscript.jl. I got the load error because it can't find the package .csv. So I would need to open it using Julia-project. And now if I include myscript.jl, then it'll work just fine. But that's kind of annoying to have to type Julia-project every time I want to open a Julia REPL that is using the right project environment. So one of the beautiful things about the Julia VS Code extension is that it gives me an integrated Julia REPL that I can open separately from my terminal. Like I don't have to type in the Julia command to open this, and it will automatically detect and use the project environment. So what it does is it uses the base folder of your VS Code workspace and looks for the manifest and project.toml files there. If it doesn't find those, it'll default to the base, global Julia environment. But as long as you have those two files there and you have an environment, it will find it. So there are a couple of ways to open it. You can open VS Code's command palette by typing Shift Command P or Shift Control P on Windows, and type Julia, and one of the first things that comes up will probably be the Julia Start REPL. So I can click on that, or the quickest way to do it is to use Option JO, or I believe that's Alt JO on Windows. So if I click that to start the REPL, now I've got a Julia REPL open, and it is using the right environment, and I can look at that by just typing the right bracket to switch down to the package manager, and I see it's got the Julia-VS Code selected. So that's a really, really handy feature. In fact, when I'm working in VS Code and using Julia, I basically never have to type Julia to open the REPL. I use the Option JO or Alt JO to open it, and everything just works.
And I think you gave me a good advice earlier. Just think of it as Julia Open.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a little mnemonic to remember that command. So that is a really, really handy feature and really speeds things up if you're having to switch back and forth between the REPL and a file and things like that. Now, we've got this data set loaded, and I've run some code. So once I've run some code, on the left-hand sidebar, you'll see this, like the 3-dot Julia logo appear. It won't have any colors on it. It's just 3 open circles, but in the shape of the little triangle, like the Julia logo. And if you click on that, you'll see some really interesting stuff here that's really handy. So you get 3 sort of panes in this little sidebar window that opens up, one called Workspace, one called Documentation, and one called Plot Navigator. And in the Workspace, this will, if you haven't run anything, this won't be available, or it'll be empty. But if you've run some code, then you will see this Julia REPL at the top, which is showing you that it's connected to the current REPL session. And you'll be able to see the different things that you have inside of the REPL. So I've got the base package loaded, the core package loaded, because I get those with Julia. I've got this interactive utils, which is the macros and stuff for seeing the LLVM code and native code and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to run the code in myscript.jl again. I'm going to highlight it like we did before and hit Shift Enter to just run that code. And once it finishes running, then over in my Workspace pane, some things have changed. And now I can see, okay, I've got this data frames package. I can see the CSV package there, and I've got some variables. So here's my data variable, which is a data frame, and I can open that and I can see, okay, here's the columns. So I can see it's got 3 columns, and I can even see what some of the values are for those columns and things like that. And then the column index and the names of the columns are all here. So you can kind of explore things this way through your code. But one of the really cool things is that if I hover over this data thing, so this is a data frame and it's a table type. There is a built-in table viewer in Julia VS Code extension. And this can be really handy. So what I'm going to do is in my workspace here, I've got my mouse hovered over data. On the right-hand side is this little icon. It looks like a little web page or something. I don't know. But if I hover over it, it says open in VS Code. And if I click on that, then it opens up this table in a new tab. And it says Julia table : data. So it's got the name of the variable where this came from. And I see it almost looks like an Excel spreadsheet. And it's got the 2 rows and it's got my header with the first, last, and age name there, which is great. And you can do some interesting stuff. So you can click on a column name to sort in ascending or descending order, and that will work on any of these columns. But then also each column has this little hamburger menu that when you hover over the column, it shows up on the left-hand side. You can click on that and you can add some filters. So if I want to filter age that is, let's say, greater than 35, then that filters out the row for Randy because he's 34. I'm 37, so I'm over 35. And you can add multiple filters as well. You can put them together using an and or an or logical operator. So if I wanted to greater than 35 and less than or equals to 36, then now it's filtered out all the rows and I don't see anything there because there are no rows that match that filter. To get rid of it, then you can just come in here and hit the backspace on any of those and it'll go away. And you've got your view there again with all the rows in your table. So that's really handy if you have a data set and you need to kind of do some exploring of the data set. If it's kind of easier to do it like this visually, you don't have to go open up Excel or some other program that you might use to do that. You could just use this table viewer and you've got the sorting and the filtering there for you as well. So that's really nice. There are a couple of different ways to open this as well. So you don't have to do it from the Workspaces tab, or Workspaces pane, on the left-hand side of the screen. You can also use the VS Code display function. So in my REPL, I'm going to type VS Code display. That's a function. I'm going to pass to it the data variable, which has the data frame that I made in it. And I'll go ahead and close the tab I had open with the data in it so that this opens again. So if I type that and hit enter, then I get that table view again. And you can also do it from a script. So in the myscript.jl file, I'm going to add a line VS Code display data, and I'm just going to highlight that one line and hit shift enter, and now I've got the table display open there. So several different ways to open that and take a look at that. That is a really nice feature, and I love that it's got the filtering built in. The sorting is nice, but to me the filtering is like actually kind of the really cool thing that it comes with. So a couple other things in the left-hand sidebar. We've talked about the workspace. You also get a documentation section. So I can search through the Julia documentation. So if I have a question about, the data frame type, I can type data frame. It may take a second for it to load up here. Here we go. And I can resize the sidebar if I need to make it bigger. But I can see here's the documentation for the data frame type. So I can see all the different constructors, everything there. This works for all the built-in documentation. It works for any packages you've installed into your environment. And it will also work, I think, with doc strings in your own project, which is really handy. And then the last thing is this plot navigator. So let's talk about plots in the Julia VS Code extension. So I'm hitting Command B. I think it's Control B on Windows or Linux, but that closes this like left-hand sidebar or toggles it between open and closed. So Command B. So I'm going to close that and I'm going to come to my script here and I'm going to add the plots.
Is that in your current environment?
It is not currently in my environment, no. I'm going to go ahead and add it now just to get it in there. So I'm just going into my package manager. So I open my REPL and dropped into the package manager REPL and I've typed add plots. And now I'm going to, I don't need all this data stuff here. I'm just going to only use plots because I just want to show how the plotting works in VS Code. So I'm just going to plot real quick a function. I'm going to create a function f of x, which is equal to x squared. And I'm going to create another function g of x, which is equal to x cubed. And I'm going to plot f Oh, helps if I select all of the code. So I'm going to select all the code and hit Shift Enter and run this, and it will open the plot for F in a new tab. It actually opens it up in like a split view, so I can see the code and then I can also see the plot here. Well, now that I've got that, let me plot on a second line. I'm going to type plot G. So this is plotting x cubed, and I'm just going to highlight that one line and hit Shift Enter. And now over in that right-hand pane, it's now changed to a plot of x cubed. So what happened to the plot of x squared, right? Like how do I see that? Over on the left-hand sidebar, click on the Julia tab again, and inside of the plot navigator pane, you'll see little thumbnails of all the plots that you've added, and you can just select which one you want to view, and it'll bring it up in that right-hand sidebar for you. So that's some really cool features with plots that I think is really handy. If you have lots of plots going on, they're all here in the plot navigator. However, there's not a lot of functionality in the plot navigator. If I just start, doing lots of plots here, so let me do plot F circ to do the composition. That's what I meant. So now I've composed F with G, and I've got another plot. So as you keep adding plots, you'll just have to like scroll through to find the one you want. There's no way to like search for those plots or anything like that, or like filter or anything. You'll just see these thumbnails. You can just scroll through and see all the plots that you have, and they will appear there. But still really handy. I do like that rather than having that plot come up in like a separate window or something like that, it just comes up in a separate tab. You don't have to leave the editor to go see your plot or anything like that. So in addition to the integrated Julia REPL that automatically detects your project environment, the plotting functionality, the table viewer, you also get a few other really nice features. One that I love is the formatting feature. So I am going to write a function called F, and it's going to take a parameter X and another parameter Y. And I've intentionally put a couple of like weird spaces here. And then I'm going to, inside of that, I don't know, it's just going to print, or maybe it's just going to return X plus Y, and then I'm going to type end, and I'm going to put a semicolon there. So this is valid, right? Like if I hit Shift Enter and run, then it works. And now I'll have it in my REPL. I can type F of 2, 3, and it'll print 5. So this code works, but it looks pretty ugly, or it's not formatted nicely. So you do get code formatting with the Julia VS Code extension, and there are a couple different ways to do it. So you can open the command palette. So that's a Command Shift P or Control Shift P. And if you type format document, you can click on that and it will format the document for you. It may take a while the first time you run this, but then subsequent times you run it after that, it'll work. And there it's formatted it for me. So it got rid of some of the extra spaces I had in my function definition, and it moved the end, which was indented. It moved that to the far left-hand side of the screen, so it lines up with the F in function. So that's handy. So that was using command palette. So Command Shift P, Control Shift P on Windows, and type format document and hit enter. The other way to do it is to type Option Shift F in your file, and that will format the document for you as well. And if you'd like to, you can actually configure VS Code to do all this like automatically when you save a file. So every time you save it, it'll just format the whole file for you. It also has built-in linter, so that'll help catch little mistakes and stuff for you. So as you're typing, if you have like a syntax error, so for example, here I type X colon, and I get a little red squiggly line underneath the Y parameter in my function, and it says an argument is included in a function signature but not used within its body. It's a parsing error. So in your terminal on VS Code, there's a problems tab, and I can see that it's got a parsing error, and it's trying to give me, what the problem is, but sometimes it doesn't really detect maybe exactly what the problem is. You don't always get the most helpful things, but it at least does, point out to you that, hey, there's an issue on this line. So we've talked about the Julia REPL, the integrated REPL. We've talked about the Julia tab on the sidebar with the Workspace viewer, the documentation search function, the plot navigator. We've talked about looking at plots. We've talked about code formatting. We've looked at static linting. If you're trying to set up a coding environment in VS Code and you want to take advantage of font ligatures. So these are things like when I type Y hat and hit space, I get the little hat over the Y.
Oh, you mean tab, right?
Tab. Did I say space?
Yeah, I think you said space.
Or if I want to do like the X underscore, these will all look nice and everything. If I do equals equals, then I get this like long equals bar. And if I do like the right arrow, it actually looks like a continuous right arrow. So this is by typing, dash and then the right angle bracket. Then rather than looking like two separate characters, it puts it all together into one single character. So that makes it nice if you're writing like anonymous functions, then they just look a little bit nicer.
Oh yeah, that looks really good.
So the way that's working here is I've got a special font called JuliaMono that I've installed. You don't have to install this, but it's kind of a nice little bonus feature if you like the font. If you don't like it, there's lots of other fonts. There's lots of other fonts that work with all these like ligatures and things like that. So you're not, you don't have to use JuliaMono, but I like the way it looks. They have a website, juliamono.netlify.app. We'll include that link in the show notes so you can check that out. And it says JuliaMono is a monospaced font for scientific and technical computing. And the whole website is in the JuliaMono font. So you can see exactly what that font looks like as the font they use on the website itself. But it's totally free. It comes with a very liberal license. And it says it's suitable for scientific and technical programming as well as for general purpose hacking and full of Unicode goodness. So the way that will work on any operating system is you can go to their GitHub repository, which is linked on that webpage. You go to the download page and then click on the webpage, and then you can download the zip files. Let's see, do they have them? JuliaMono.ttf.zip. So right there, you'd be able to open that, and then you could just download that file and then unzip it, and that'll give you all the font files. And then it's got instructions on their website how to do it for different operating systems. So it tells you how to use the font book on Mac OS, or how to install it on Windows using the font manager on Linux, or doing it from the command line. There's also a really easy way where you don't have to manually download a zip file. If you're on Mac OS, you can use Homebrew to install it, and that's how I did it. And it automatically downloaded all the font files, put them in the right locations, and then I had that ready to go. And then in VS Code, the way you change the font is you go to preferences. So you can go to file preferences, or you can type command or control comma, and that will open up the settings, not preferences, sorry. So there's two types of settings in VS Code. There are user settings, which are like specific to you, and every time you open VS Code, those user settings will apply. Or there are workspace settings, which creates a little folder inside of the base folder of the VS Code workspace called .VS Code, and we'll have a settings file, settings.json file in there. So if you want settings just for a specific project, you can set them in the workspace. If you want something that's going to happen every time you open VS Code, no matter what project you're opening, use the user settings. But if you type editor.fontFamily, or just editor.font brought it up, then you'll see the setting for editor font family, and you can type in JuliaMono once you have it installed, and that will set the font for you. Now, there is one additional step that you have to do in order for the ligatures to work. Then you do have to add a line to the actual settings.json. They don't give you like a more user-friendly way to do this, but right underneath when you type edit.font, or editor.font, whatever, then right underneath where it says font family, there's font ligatures, and you open that. And if you have it already in your JSON file, it will take you right there. I did not. So I had to add this line, editor.font ligatures, and see all this stuff. So how did I know that's what I was supposed to add, right? Well, I didn't. That's because I copied it from the JuliaMono website.
I feel silly, but I didn't even know that you could make those .VS Code files could contain those .json files for like the settings of a given directory.
Oh yeah.
That's so useful to know. Especially because I switch between font size and like theme colors when I'm teaching a lot. Like, I learned something new just now.
Nice. So yeah, if you have settings you want done for a specific project, you use those workspace settings. One thing to keep in mind with that is, it'll create this .VS Code directory in your thing. And if you're using GitHub or Git, you probably want to add that VS Code file to your, or directory rather, to your git ignore. Yeah. So it's not getting shared around, because maybe some people don't want it, or it doesn't really need to live, version control. But okay. So how did I know what to add for the, for the font ligatures? So on the JuliaMono website, there is a FAQ page, and a little ways down, there's a question, how do I control features in CSS and Atom, Juno, or VS Code? And I clicked on VS Code, and it shows you, kind of how to set it up. But then it also gives you, if you have to scroll down a little ways, it gives you some different things. So if you want all the currently available stylistic sets, then I just came in here and I copied this and copied that into my settings.json file in VS Code. And then it also has some, different setup if you don't like some of the contextual alternatives, but you want like /0 or different things. There's some additional things you can do to set it up there. But I just grabbed all the currently available stylistic sets, copied and pasted everything here for that, and then went back to VS Code and put it in my settings.json, and voila, everything worked. So we talked about a lot of different things about VS Code and the Julia VS Code extension. We talked about a couple of different ways to install Julia, how to install Visual Studio Code, and installing the Julia VS Code extension. We saw how to work with the integrated Julia REPL that comes with the Julia VS Code extension, the Julia tab you get on the sidebar that has the workspace and the documentation search and the plot navigator. And we talked about the code formatting and linting tools that come with it. So once you have all this set up, you have a pretty robust Julia development environment put together.
Yeah, and I'm excited about learning more about VS Code and the extensions that might come as well. I'm really excited about the Pluto.jl extension. And as you know, like I'm a big notebook fan. That's how I primarily program. And Pluto is my favorite up and coming notebook. So I'm excited about that. Go check it out, install the extension. It's still in beta, but whatever. David, thank you for teaching me a bunch of things about VS Code, because you always seem to do that with everything.
Hey,
so,
we both learn a lot from each other. It's a two-way street. All right. Well, thanks, Randy, for hanging out and talking Julia with me.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll see y'all next time.
All right. See you next week. Bye.